You're now listening to the Engage the Rockies podcast, your go-to podcast for local and state issues concerning Colorado.
Hello, Rockies. This is Sarah Jane Maroney, your host, and welcome to this week's episode. We are joined by DJ Summers of the Common Sense Institute. He is the Director of Policy and Research, oversees the stages of CSI's fellows and research staff, coordinates with partners, iterates and analyzes projects, and breaks down findings for the public legislators and commercial leaders. Prior to CSI, DJ attended the University of Utah and Syracuse University. He worked as a journalist, investigator, and political researcher across the U.S. from Washington, D.C. to Alaska. DJ has a drive to understand complex truths and make them clear and accessible to the public and its leaders alike. DJ lives in Denver and is a classically trained pianist. He devotes his spare time to practicing and studying music, and when not at the piano bench, he has a regime of strength training, combat sports, and enjoys a good Colorado beer. We welcome him. Hello, DJ. Welcome back.
It's great to be here. It feels like it's been so long.
It hasn't, actually. We still had more to talk about, and yet I wanted to shift a little bit to the transportation aspect of things.
Yeah, I mean, there's always more to talk about. I mean, transportation is so crucial, and it's looped into literally every single thing that we do. You can't escape the conversation of transportation. Transportation is connected to housing. It's connected to environmental goals. It's connected to energy consumption. It's connected to inflation. It's connected to food pricing. It's connected to absolutely everything. So it's one of those kind of linchpin conversations to have. It has its fingers in every other policy discussion.
Yeah, and we talked before about public safety. So I guess I wanted to open the conversation talking about RTD. And our governor is very, very keen with his train. I live in Colorado Springs, and it has never in a million years occurred to me that I should take a train from Colorado Springs to Denver. And I've actually never been on the RTD in Denver, and I don't know how safe that is or how well connected it is.
Well,
So maybe you could speak to that.
If you haven't been on RTD in Denver, then count yourself among the majority, because they are still experiencing really low ridership rates. And this is a perennial problem with RTD right now, is that ridership rates are down. They're down from the pandemic. Pandemic came in and people stopped riding on public transit as much as they were before. And we had a kind of low ridership rate anyway before the pandemic hit. This isn't one of those kind of really dense urban environments like your Chicagos or your Eastern Seaboard that has that kind of embedded public transit culture with subways and surface transportation. It just doesn't really look like that here. Ridership has been declining in RTD. They've been having a really tough time getting people back. And a huge portion of that we found when we were doing this analysis of RTD ridership is public safety, or at least the perception of public safety. The RTD generally just has a big black eye right now when it comes to its perception of public safety. There have been so many violent crimes. I think, just in the first quarter of the year we did it last year, there were 3 or 4 murders that took place on RTD rides, just on trains. And that doesn't account for all of the other items that happen, that all of the lower level violent crimes, aggravated assaults, just even robberies or simple assaults, things like that didn't count for. But you've seen crime rates associated with bus stops and train terminals, all the places that would be designated as RTD stops, and they've just gone up and up and up over the past couple of years, particularly since the pandemic happened. Now, there's a couple of problems with that. First of all, RTD has its own police force, but that police force wasn't really beefed up until the last 5 years. So there's not a lot of data analysis that substantiates any of this before that time. You have to go from local jurisdictions' police data or from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. And it's tricky because no police agency has an easy time governing authority with RTD stops. Like in Denver, DPD isn't allowed to have jurisdiction on an RTD stop in certain areas. They can do like if a crime occurs, then it will be with RTD sometimes and DPD other times. If a crime occurs in Lakewood, we don't know if it's going to the Lakewood Police Department or if RTD is handing it over there. There's this strange jurisdiction problem that's happening, and there's not sometimes a lot of cooperation between the two entities, between law enforcement agencies. So it's really difficult to even track crime on RTD. But even their police force generally acknowledges that there has been an increase in crime on RTD, but it's hard to tell people that it's getting better at any point because the data is so murky because of all these jurisdiction issues. So they beefed up their police force. It's got, over 100 officers right now. I just read a recent story that says they've got a decrease in the number of calls that are coming from RTD riders. But it's going to take a long time for people to absorb the message that RTD has gotten safer. And that's just one piece of the puzzle. The other piece of the puzzle is frequency of ridership. Are these options for ridership going where people need them? Are we in a kind of post-COVID, post-pandemic society where all those job centers aren't as dense as they used to be? Denver is much less occupied now than it was beforehand. So since RTD developed around really dense job centers, are they going to where they're supposed to go?
Sure. Well, in a post-pandemic world, so many people are working from home now, and that's changed things. So, as I said, I haven't ever thought of riding a train to Denver, but the roads, if we would shift over there, are atrocious. Everyone says that. And when you travel outside of Colorado, all of a sudden the pavement smooths out. Why is that? Shouldn't we be shouldn't isn't there a bunch of money that has gone into the infrastructure of Colorado and made everything smoother?
Well, there's a bunch of money. The long and short of it is that less of that money is going to surface road maintenance than you might like there to be. It's not your imagination when you say that roads in Colorado maybe seem a little bit pothole ridden. To say nothing of the congestion. We've got some pretty bad highway conditions. We ranked 47th on the conditions of our rural highway pavement. We ranked 45th for urban highway pavements. And it's bad news. We're at the very bottom of national rankings statewide just for the quality of our highways. So all those potholes and the seams and just the general experience of the condition of Colorado highways, it's not your imagination. They're bad generally. They're at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to national rankings, and that's annoying on the front end, and on the back end, given enough time and enough bad conditions, it becomes dangerous. We ranked 40th in urban fatality rates associated with roads, so it becomes a danger after a certain point to not have that kind of upkeep on our surface transportation offerings because potholes cause accidents. And when you've got a state that has become as congested, we rank 36th in traffic congestion, by the way. When you've got a state that is this congested, those problems all just compound on each other. They keep going.
What is the solution to that, though? I mean, if you look at the population of Colorado Springs, it has tripled in the last 20 years or so. And it's sort of insane. You see a city that is of a size that then has too many people on the roads that it has. What can be done about that?
Well, there's really only two options with that. You have more people, and they are stressing an existing transportation infrastructure. You only really have two routes there. You can get people to use that transportation infrastructure less, or you can build that infrastructure out more to accommodate more people. And Colorado's tack with this. Colorado's strategy has more so been towards trying to steer people towards other transportation offerings than it has towards expanding highway offerings and expanding road transportation offerings. That's been their method of dealing with this. Their money that goes to transportation maintenance goes a lot more towards electrification offerings, like, developing EV charging stations, goes towards developing, bike lanes, multimodal transportation offerings, goes towards developing mass transit, things like that, and less for highway maintenance and highway build out. And this is taking place even though we have the same number of lane miles. We're still a growing state, and people are still using surface roads on an increasing level. We're not driving less in Colorado is the thing. As much as they're expanding the bike offerings, as much as they're expanding mass transit offerings, to your point, people are not driving less. We're continuing to drive more miles on Colorado roads every year.
Yeah, we spoke with Matt Solomon of the NCEI, and I know recently that Colorado Springs Utilities said they were just not going to manage to make these green sort of deadlines that have been set. And going green is not a bad thing in any way, shape, or form, but it does seem like some of that is a bit arbitrary. Like, okay, we're going to pick a year randomly out of a hat and say we're going to be all green in this particular arena, and that doesn't seem very practical.
It causes some issues, and I think you're seeing some of those issues here in Colorado. Trying to hit emissions reduction targets. Automobiles are a big part of that. So you want to discourage certain kinds of emissions. You want to discourage automobile emissions. You try to get people to ride less, which means that you're going to end up diverting certain funds that used to go to highways and building out mass transit offerings. That's just part of the puzzle. Most of the fees that have been generated to try to boost transportation spending, they end up getting spent on electrification as well. It's not just the normal funding that came in. There have been 4 fees that were attached to transportation, like Amazon delivery fees, DoorDash, Uber Eats fees, those kinds of fees that rack up that you pay whenever you order an Amazon package or DoorDash, which for a lot of us is a couple times a week these days. Those fees go towards electrification. They go towards mass transit. That's $200 million worth of these daily fees that you experience that are allegedly, or they're designated to go towards transportation. What they really go towards is electrification, towards mass transit. That's a big portion of our green movement right now, is trying to reduce lane miles, trying to reduce uh, how much people are driving, trying to reduce emissions on the energy ends. They've had a lot of similar impacts just directly in energy production that we're releasing a study on in not too long, in the next couple of weeks. But it's all part of the same kind of constellation of factors, constellation of concerns.
I saw something recently about Denver and parking spaces, and you guys have quite an issue there as well. And people were saying that they still need their cars to get to the mountains, but then therefore that they need to park them. But there was talk of getting rid of paying for parking in Denver. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's always some kind of talk about parking related issues in Denver proper, whether or not we need to make more buildings available by reducing their parking requirements. Buildings come up now, then you have to have a parking requirement for a certain amount of parking spots for a building. In order to encourage more building, they, in some cases, get rid of those parking requirements. That's been something that they've been working on at like the housing development level. And then there are the normal parking reductions. There was an increase in parking meter fees in the last couple of years. And there's always some kind of discussion about how to gently encourage people, I guess is how I should put it, to not use their vehicles as much, to try to uh, incentivize them to use other ways. But you're right in that Colorado is not an urban environment like a Chicago or like a New York City. People are here because they want to go enjoy the outdoors. And you can't really get to the outdoors without a vehicle. So I think that's probably one of the factors that explains why we keep seeing people use more lane miles. They just don't move to Colorado or to Denver with the expectation that they can hang out in the city for most of the time. They're going to get out. Whether or not that's a feature of our daily life that could ever be changed is not for me to answer. I'm not Nostradamus. I don't think that I could answer that, but uh, my guess is that it isn't going to change that much. And there are a lot of public transit offerings that they've tried to offer to bridge that gap up to the mountains. There's lots of rail lines or bus lines, things like that try to get people up there. But you lose the independence, you lose your ability to pack up your gear, potentially if you're going camping or skiing, something like that. So it's that's kind of a sticky issue that I think we're going to have to solve here if we want to minimize lane miles up into the mountains.
Well, and Americans have love affairs with cars. And as you're pointing out, it's just sort of impractical to get out into the middle of the wilderness on a bus. It just is.
Yeah. We were speaking a little bit about this. I think we tend to think that urban infrastructure here can be developed along the same lines of Europe. And in some ways, it can. There are cities in the United States that have very robust and very workable public transit offerings. There's the BART in San Francisco, and there's the T in Boston, and Subway in New York City, and the Metro in Washington, D.C. And those are more embedded. They've been there for a long time. Those cities have been there for many hundreds of years. They had European architectural styles. They were denser to begin with. And that's what we talk about when we talk about Europe is we're talking about cities and places that have been there and been cities and been developed for 1,000 years or more, and they don't have this wilderness expansion that was part of our national development at the time. We still have vast open spaces. We push into places that don't have infrastructure. That's how our country was developed. So, I guess there's kind of a question about whether or not public transit can be made to European style density when we don't have European style density just generally in the United States. We don't have that big mass of people living per square mile the way that they do there.
So is things like, the energy goals and trying for a rail line between, basically going from Wyoming to New Mexico through Colorado, is that a realistic goal? I mean, we're talking about the behavior of humans and Coloradans and what we do and how we do things. And it just doesn't seem very practical. I'm not saying that trying to get to green goals isn't a good thing in a general sense. But again, these arbitrary dates and dictating to Coloradans how they're going to perform or behave in a certain way. Like I said, I've never been on the RTD. I have no idea. It just has never, I don't go to Denver that often, but if you go to a museum or something like that, you go and look for parking. It is just sort of a behavioral modification thing that doesn't seem very practical.
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion of that in some circles, like whether or not this encouraging of public mass transportation, like, developing rail lines, stuff like that, whether or not it is following consumer preference or whether or not it's trying to dictate consumer preference, whether or not it's trying to just tell people what they like the consumer to do. In Colorado, I think the fact that we continue to use more lane miles, we continue to just drive more, the more people we add here, shows us that consumer preference in Colorado is to drive. It's then less more so than it is to take rail. Now, the argument from the people who will want to build those kinds of rail offerings out is if you build it, they will come. If people are taking the car because they don't have the alternative option. That would be left up to the future to decide. What I can tell you is that it would be very expensive as a proposition. Uh, the fast tracks from Denver to Longmont, Denver to Boulder, when that project got approved, they were very, very positive and very optimistic about how long it would take for them to do it. And it's still not completed. They still haven't gotten that done yet. And they've only completed, a handful of miles on that. We broke the spending down in one of our previous reports, and it's something like, I think 14 or 17 million has been spent per mile. If you just break down what they've spent currently and what they've actually accomplished. So to talk about some kind of massive front range interconnected rail, we know that that would be a massive amount of money in order to get that done. In this budgetary environment, that might be a tricky add, particularly with the federal administration. We can't rely on the same kinds of influx for rail related projects that we might have, 5 years ago, something like that, or even before then. So the feasibility of getting it done is that it would be very expensive. The evidence that points to people using it en masse, I don't think exists in Colorado right now.
Yeah. And again, going back to the roads and we're kind of in a circular vortex here that we just kind of, behavior modification and consumer preference, et cetera, et cetera. It just does seem that when you're paying 29 cents, which, oh no, it's just 29 cents. It's just a little tiny little bit of money, but that adds up fast. And you just said that it went all to electric and none of it is going to fix the roads that are so bad. And yet, if Coloradans are driving, shouldn't the budget be looked at in that lens?
That would be up to someone from the government to answer rather than me. My take on it would be that, yeah, we should probably have funding devoted to what people are doing rather than what we would like them to do. You're trying to encourage certain types of behavior in order to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions or to encourage denser housing development or generally encourage safety, things like that. Those are noble goals, I suppose. Definitely, I don't think any of us would say that those aren't noble goals. Those are good thoughts, things that we would like to have. But the fact of the matter is that's not what people do. It just isn't how people are behaving right now. And our safety is being compromised because we don't have the quality roads that we should have if all of those funds went to highway development and highway maintenance instead.
Yeah. I know that the House Minority Leader Rose Puglisi ran a bill to try and repeal the bag tax, and it failed miserably in the House. But again, this is this whole conversation surrounding and engage the Guaraquis. We believe in free markets. We believe in individual freedoms, and this is this conversation about trying to dictate what people are doing. So, do you have any final thoughts in terms of transportation in Colorado? I mean, would you say 45th and 47th in terms of urban and
47th for rural highway, 45th for urban highway.
Oh, whoa.
40th in urban fatality rates, 36th in traffic congestion.
Wow. That
So
is
that comes
abysmal.
from that comes from a study from the Reason Foundation. They did kind of an analysis of all of those, but it worked well with our ongoing study because we got deep into the budget about what was happening, and the long and short of it is that all of these fees, everything that we pay, it's just not going to highway maintenance. It's going to, some of it's going to highway maintenance, but It's been used more and more towards electrification, towards bike lanes, multimodal transportation, towards those items. That's where it's going for. That's where people's head is. They're not trying to build the highways out, really. They're trying to uh, they're trying to make other things happen. They're trying to allow for the circumstances that other things happen. In the meantime, our roads are just terrible.
Well, and e-bikes, that's a big thing down here. The council just approved to allow the e-bikes to be used on tops, and yet all the other counties around us did this like 5 years ago. So, but again, people aren't necessarily using a bike to get from their home to their place of work. They're using it for recreation. And you have, older people that want a little bit of an assist, therefore using the e-bike. But again, on a trails situation, enjoying the outdoors, which is one of the basic things in our state.
Right, right. I don't have any numbers handy on the prevalence of e-bikes, unfortunately, but I can definitely tell that it will be a part of the conversation. Like that multimodal transit, that's always a thing. Like municipalities are always talking, states are always talking about, how do we solve what they call the missing mile? We get them somewhere on a bus or on a train, but how do we get them that last mile from the train to where they live or where they work or where their destination is? And it's always those kind of intermediaries like the scooters or e-bikes or something like that. Those are kind of in the conversation about what fills that gap. So when you're talking about transportation development, and if we're developing more mass transit, more like electrification projects and stuff, those are always going to be in the mix as a way to tacitly encourage people to use private or public transportation so that they can just make up that gap between the office and the bus stop, or that gap between, the grocery store and the train.
Yeah. Well, and that's just it. It isn't there. It's not happening. And in the meantime, we're all driving over potholes. Although I did find out from a city councilman in Colorado Springs that there's a number you can call, or you can report potholes in Colorado Springs for people, which I thought was quite interesting to know. I didn't know that.
Spotter. I don't know if I've had that.
Yeah.
Yeah. They might want to have an equivalent up here in the Denver metro too.
We'll have to suggest that to someone. Well, DJ, as always, you are a wealth of information, and we really appreciate the furthering of this conversation, since things are so interconnected between public safety and transportation, and yet, unfortunately, we're failing as a state.
Well, I'm always happy to be here. Always happy. We've got, I've got a lot of data simmering around in the old noodle here. So anytime you want to have me on and talk, I'm happy to do it. This has been delightful.
Thank you very much, DJ. Take care.
You too.
Thank you for listening to the Engage the Rockies podcast, your go-to podcast for local and state issues concerning Colorado.